Welcome to the day in history for April 15th. Now, today is the day that the Titanic sank. Pretty big day in history, and it's one that there's tons of information on. Tons of documentaries, tons of short videos. There's probably been like 20 National Geographic videos. There's movies about it. It's a pretty popular disaster just because of how huge it was and how shocking it was, because this was the unsinkable ship that sank on its first voyage. Now, the big idea for today is don't be overconfident. Now, one of the main facts that people talk about with the Titanic is that it was called unsinkable, or nearly unsinkable is what they said, but then everybody else picked it up and said it is unsinkable. And that was because of how they built the ship to have these watertight compartments so that if even one of them broke, it would seal, or it would be sealed, and then it wouldn't flow to the rest of the ship, which was a pretty good idea. Unfortunately, when this one sank, it broke enough of them that it still sank anyway. So, a couple interesting things that we'll talk about actually have to do with when it was found. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first, big idea, don't be overconfident. I'll let you write this down. Okay. Now, we are in the North Atlantic. And I didn't put any dots on the map today because I wanted you just to see how big the ocean is. Now, obviously, it's not as big as the Pacific Ocean, but it's still pretty big. And the travel between England and New York and the east coast of America was a pretty big business at the time. Remember, this is before airplanes. I mean, there were airplanes, but they were still like at Kitty Hawk with the Wright siblings. Now, so the main way to travel between Europe and America was by ship, and the Titanic was like the ship. It was going to be the most amazing, the richest, the most fantastic way to cross the Atlantic. So we are in the Atlantic, and it actually sank a little ways off the coast of North America. So right over here. Okay. Now, let's go over some facts of the Titanic. Now, many of you have already done research on the Titanic. Some of you have maybe seen the movie. Some of you have been to the Mac exhibit. So we already know quite a bit about it, but let me just run through some facts here. So I'm going to read some facts off my notes behind here. So a total of they estimate 1,517 people died, 832 passengers, and 685 crew. So 68% of the people on that ship died. 76% of the people that died were from third class. 58% of the second class people died, and 39% of the first class people died. So the total number of people that were on the ship when it left was 3,560, which wasn't actually as full as it could be. Now, what's interesting about this is that the ship didn't have enough lifeboats for everybody. Nowadays, that would never happen. It's a law. But back then, they took lifeboats out of the design because they thought it made the deck look too cluttered or too dirty, or like it was just unsightly, which goes to show you how confident they were that this ship wouldn't sink. They didn't even have enough boats to rescue everybody. So, pretty sad. Now, the Titanic, the Titanic was really big. It was 882 feet long, 92 feet across, and 104 feet tall. If you look at this picture here, like that's a 747. You remember the building we saw for the Boeing 747 Day in History about that giant building that they make these things in? Look how big that airplane is. Wait, that's not a 747. That's a 737. Sorry. You can see the tiny little dot is a person down there. So this was a huge, huge ship. Now, I came across some really cool pictures of it being built. You don't see these pictures very often, and if you do a little bit of searching on the internet, you can find some cool pictures. So, about 15,000 people were hired to build this. It took them about 3 years, and it cost $7.5 million in 1912. So nowadays, that's about $400 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but for something like this, it's really not that expensive. So, but this is a picture of where it was about to be built. It hadn't been started yet. This is a picture. This is a really cool picture. It's kind of hard to see from this, but if you find the picture online, it's really cool. This is actually the inside of the Titanic, and if you look over here, you can actually see the floor and the ceiling where they would actually put the walls and stuff. Pretty cool picture. This is a picture of it being built with its sister ship. These propellers are huge. Look how big those are. Now, we're in 1912. We're in the age where technology and industry is catching up with all the dreams and ideas of the people. This is when the big monuments were made, the big, huge buildings. We started to use steel and iron. And so it goes to show that we would make big ships as well. Look how big those things were. It's pretty amazing. Now, when it was finally finished, it was a sight. I could not even imagine. I mean, could you imagine if you lived on a farm for your entire life? Your family lived on a farm, and then one day you decide to go to the city, and you go up to the pier, and you see the Titanic, this giant, giant ship. It would blow you away. I think that would be an amazing thing to see. Now, here's a diagram of the Titanic. Now, it was a very, very well designed, and a lot of engineering went into this. Now, unfortunately, it sank, so obviously there were some engineering flaws, but I think a lot of that actually had to do with human error. It had to do with ignoring the iceberg warnings, going too fast, and just being overconfident. So there were a total of 840 separate rooms for passengers on the Titanic. Now, this is a pretty cool side view. You can see how the bottom, they had a lot of the engine compartments and the steam engines and such. But it was pretty cool. Now, their first voyage was going to go from Southampton, England, all the way to New York. And they really wanted to get there quick. Now, this voyage, if you could get a ticket, if you could get a first-class ticket to the maiden voyage of the Titanic, it was a big deal. It was bragging rights, and there were millionaires, there were very, very rich people that went on this voyage. Now, for the first-class people, or actually, sorry, I forgot I was going to show you about the crew. Now, these were the officers of the crew. These were the people that were responsible for making sure the ship ran correctly. The guy with the beard was the captain, and these were the people that ultimately are responsible for the sinking of the Titanic, because there were a lot of warnings that they had about these icebergs. And I'm not going to talk too much about the actual sinking. I think that you guys can do some research on that, or you probably already know quite a bit about it. But this was the crew that was responsible for the Titanic. Now, boy, this was a rich, rich ship. This was a picture of the grand staircase. I think it went like 6 separate levels. It was beautiful. There are some really cool computer animated tours you can take of these parts, or parts of the first class area. They had barbershops, bars, restaurants, heated pools, workout rooms. It was truly like a luxury hotel. Now, this was one of those, like they call it a smoking room, where gentlemen would sit and smoke cigars and drink brandy. Pretty fancy. This was a first-class bedroom or a stateroom. I mean, it looks like a really, really nice hotel room. I can only imagine what it was like to be there in person. Well, obviously, I wouldn't want to be there in person, because then I might be on one thing. But anyway, yeah. Now, this is the second and third class area. You can see, just look at the ceiling. The ceiling up there, it's got the air vents. It's not finished. It doesn't have chandeliers, but it's still not bad. It's not nice. I mean, it's pretty nice. You paid a lot less to be second and third class, obviously, and so you ate in areas like this. Now, the third class rooms were pretty small, 4 people, you had a washroom, you had a window, not too big, but to be honest, you probably didn't spend a whole lot of time there anyway. You'd want to go out and explore the giant ship. Now, there's a lot of different pictures of what might be the iceberg. Some people say this is the iceberg that it hits. It's hard to say, but something like this is what ultimately sank the Titanic. Now, what happened, and there's a ton of videos that go all through how the Titanic sank, but what they believe is that the Titanic saw the iceberg too late, turned, and actually slid along the side of it and had a bunch of tiny little punctures. And that's what actually caused it to sink. Some people think that if the Titanic wouldn't have turned, if they would have just ran right into it and smashed the front, the ship probably would have been fine because it only would have flooded a couple of the compartments in the front. But because it skidded along the side, it poked holes in multiple watertight compartments, which then made it start to sink to the side and then go down. This is an iconic image of the Titanic sinking. If you Google Titanic sinking, this is one of the first pictures that comes up. And I don't even want to imagine what it would have been like. I went and saw the movie Titanic in the movie theater when it came out. Boy, I must have been like 19 years old. Completely packed movie theater. It was a pretty amazing experience, and it was pretty moving. They did a pretty good job. Now, this is actually a picture from that movie. They did a good job of describing how it sank. It actually started to sink in the front and then went up and broke in half, and pretty interesting. Now, they found the Titanic in 1985, and there's actually a really interesting story behind that, is that it was actually part of a top secret government mission to find 2 nuclear submarines that had sunk during the Cold War in the 1960s. And they made a deal with the guy that found it, that if he helped them find these and go through these 2 submarines, they'd let him look for the Titanic too. So it just came out a little while ago that they found the Titanic during a top secret government mission to look for nuclear submarines. Pretty crazy story. You should look that up. That'd make a really good research topic. But they did rescue quite a few people, but nowhere near as many as they should have if there was enough lifeboats. So overall, it's a really huge disaster and it's a tragedy, but it's also a really good lesson that we can't be overconfident. We can't think that things are unsinkable or indestructible or that they will never happen. And that's why we have to prepare. And that's why you should always have enough lifeboats on your ship. Okay, see you guys.